Songs of Dying Swans by Jack C. Haldeman II. This story was published in the second of Judy-Lynn Del Rey's stellar anthologies in 1976. Read by Darrell T. Smith II for my channel, Quasar Spectra. Songs of Dying Swans. It was a time of peace. Music and the laughter of small children filled the air of 1,000 colonized planets. It was a time of tranquility, a pause for breath after the frantic race to the stars. It was a small footnote in the pages of time. On the planet Qatar, which circled patiently around the star known locally as Brit, but called the Sun by all who shared its light, was an elderly shopkeeper named Barth John Smith. He was assisted in his duties by a young man who chose, in the fashion of the younger generation, to drop his surnames and be called simply Ross. They bought and sold music at a time when it was in vogue and thereby attained a modest return, sufficient for the shopkeeper, yet not enough in the eyes of the ambitious Ross. Although it was not yet time for mid-meal, the shop had been open for hours. As usual, it was Barth who opened it and invoiced the orders that came in during the night. It would be quite some time before Ross showed up, if indeed he came in at all. This was of little concern to the old man, as he was quite capable of maintaining the shop by himself. It saddened him somewhat to see how lightly the young people took their responsibilities. Yet he had grown philosophical in his advancing years and realized that the flush of youth was a passing thing, something to be enjoyed at the time and remembered in the waning years. The printout of orders on his desk was long. Business had been very good the last few years. People had so much leisure time that they naturally turned to music, turned to introspection. Barth enjoyed just being a part of this. The money was secondary. So much potential happiness passed through his shop to the far-flung worlds by the small transmitter in the back room. Today was not like the days of his father's father. Then people were always rushing, always busy, with no time for the enjoyment of the fruits of their labor. His was a specialty business, dealing only with items in small supply and high demand. Items that, due to their very nature, were not suitable for mass distribution or manufacture. Therefore, he dealt mostly with individuals, taking their orders directly and shipping from his shop into their homes or places of business. Except for those living on the most primitive of the settled planets, almost everybody had a transmitter, or at the very least a receiving unit, in his home. Even the primitive worlds had a unit in each village. The music he shipped out consisted of a variety of formats. From the planet Zor, he received ornate glass jars filled with several levels of unmixing colored oils, which reacted to the presence of human life by giving off harmonious vibrations. From Balzar, the singing flowers. From Energumen, the sturdy tree of songs. From Freuchen, the tinkling ice structures. And so it went, 1,000 artifacts from 1,000 worlds, all bringing music to the ears of mankind. But most of all, it was the crystals from Balzar. Of all the music, theirs was unquestionably the most soothing. Sitting on their small, ornately sculptured bases, the crystals emitted a lightly ringing music of unrepeating patterns. The beautiful sounds ran up and down the scales. Crystal harmonics slipped above and below the normal range of hearing, and these, too, were soothing. They seemed almost hypnotic, certainly peaceful. The demand was high for the crystals, and Barth had a standing order for all that were produced on Balzar. Barth John Smith was finishing the morning shipments when Ross finally came in. The young assistant was dressed in the brightly affected fashion of the current generation. His head was shaved and tinted a dull blue. Gaudy earrings swung from the side of his head. All this Barth took in stride. He had seen fashions come and go on a dozen worlds in his years. Perhaps the boy would yet learn enough to take over the shop when it was time. "Good times," the boy greeted as he sat on the edge of the desk. "Times," nodded the man. "Times. How are the night orders? Are we rich, old man?" "Times are good." Barth smiled. "But not that good." "Then we should make them better, old man. Raise our prices or something." "We make a comfortable profit." "The Balzar crystals are underpriced. We could make a fortune on them alone. Everybody wants them." "I have talked many times with the people of Balzar. They are satisfied with the present arrangements. I would not wish to jeopardize their planet's sole export for a little profit." "What do you care about those filthy creatures? Call them people. Ha! You insult us all." "They were men once, like you and me. Never forget that. It was an experiment in genetic manipulation that went wrong. You cannot blame them for that." "I don't blame them for anything. I simply can't stand the beasts and fail to understand why you should let any feelings toward them get in the way of our making money. They don't look like men. They don't even walk like men." "Have you ever met one or talked to one of them?" Barth asked. "Of course not. They can't even leave their planet. They're disgusting. All they ever do is crawl around in the mud and muck of Balzar." "They are not intolerable people," said the old man sadly, "and they do make beautiful music. Music that carries the melancholy of their situation and their yearning for better days. We could not ask more of them. They have suffered so much." "You will not convince me, old man. Mudcrawlers they are and always will be." Ross slid off the desk and started to pace around the room. "There's nearly an hour before mid-meal. What do you want me to do?" "The morning shipments are all out. Perhaps you could work on the inventory today." "I did that last week," Ross complained. "It is far from finished and is a necessary job. We would not like to get orders we could not fill. We would lose money that way." Ross nodded and walked to the soundproof door leading to the storage room. He paused to take a pair of headphones off the hook next to the door. The headphones blocked off most of the music inside the room by generating white noise. Without them, the barrage of sound would have been intolerable. The room was huge, larger, in fact, than the main part of the shop. Ross started taking the inventory at the far end, jotting notes on a small pad. The room was filled nearly to overflowing, making Ross feel constantly cramped. He preferred not to spend any more time than necessary inside. He had finished counting ice structures and was closing the freezer when he saw that one of the doors to an unused storage vault was open. Absently, he started to close the door and at the last minute looked inside. Compartmented inside the vault were Balzar crystals. Thousands of them. This was not the normal stock. These were extras and worth a fortune. Ross had never seen so many. He slowly closed the door and finished the inventory as thoughts of easy money filled his head. Barth was taking his mid-meal at his desk as usual when Ross returned. He set the inventory pad on the desk next to the old man. "Finished," said Ross. "I go to take my mid-meal with companions. Good times." Barth John Smith nodded, realizing that the odds on Ross returning later in the day were slight. The young man strolled out the door and down the narrow, winding street. Shortly he came to a tavern, which he entered. Inside, the small building was finished to old-fashioned tastes. Strobe lights flashed against a swirling background of shifting colors, while loud, if tasteless, music came from simple unidimensional speakers. Ross and his friends often met there, their modern garb making them stand out even more than usual. His friends were in their regular booth. "Good times," he said, approaching them. They slapped the tops of their polished heads in a mock salute of greeting. Ross returned the gesture and sat down. "How was the day at the sweatshop?" asked the girl called Kryn, her head shining in the flashing lights. Ross shrugged. "I put in my token appearance." "Why?" asked Lon, a fat boy across the table. Ross looked at him quizzically. "I mean, why do you bother at all?" Ross caught the waiter's attention, raised one finger, pointed at the drink in front of Kryn, and then to himself. The waiter nodded, and Ross turned back to Lon across the table. "Because there's money to be made in music." "What do you need money for?" "On the dole from womb to doom." Lon laughed easily, and the others joined in. "I mean big money," said Ross. "Money to do things with, maybe even enough to get away from this stinking planet." Laughter again went around the table. Kryn reached up and patted the top of Ross's head. "Been out in the sun too long," she said. His drink came, and Ross slumped back into his chair, suddenly very serious. "What do you know about the inhabitants of Balzar?" Ross asked, slowly sipping his drink. "Worms," Lon spat. "Slimy worms." There were nods and general murmurs of agreement around the table. If the people of Balzar had any friends, none were sitting around Ross. "Their music is nice, though," said Kryn, offering the nearest thing to a compliment. "And very expensive," Ross said. "What of it?" "The old man has a lot of crystals." "Of course he does," said the girl. "He sells the stuff." "No, I mean he has a lot of them, more than he could sell in 5 years." "So what? What good does that do us?" "It seems to me that there's money to be made here if we could only figure out a way." "You all can figure it out," Lon said, pushing back his chair and rising. "I've got to get to my rehabilitation lecture. Good times." "Don't let them talk you into a job," said Ross. "Don't worry about that. Meet tonight?" "Yeah, my place," said Ross. "Times." The group broke up, and Ross, having nothing better to do, thought briefly about going back to the shop. But the idea of work bothered him, and he ordered another drink, settling back to plan his way to instant riches. "Hello, one with smooth features. Does the day go well with you?" "As well as possible, praise be. And you, one with rugged handsomeness, how goes the work in the field?" "Passably well. We are almost finished for the year, and just in time, too. I have noticed the nights grow long. Soon there will be frost on the upper levels. Not for a few weeks yet. Are you afraid, my little one?" "No, not really. We have trust in you." "Better you should have trust in the crystals." "Praise be. They are our hope." "The fields are harvested, and the next crop is seeded to harden in the freeze. There is only one more shipment to Qatar, and we will be finished for the year." "We may yet survive another freeze. May I ask you something in humble mode, rugged handsomeness?" "It is allowed to be familiar." "There are so few little ones. Why do we not start a family?" "We must await better times. It is asking too much that we should bring a child into these difficult days. We are tied to the sales of the crystals for the heat units in order to survive the freeze. If a crop goes bad, it will hurt us terribly." "There are things we can do, are there not, to protect us?" "They are being done. We have built up a stockpile of crystals on Qatar to safeguard against a poor crop. Secondly, we have each year been turning down the heat units to make them last longer. This is not generally known. I have noticed the freezes have been colder than in my youth. We adjust. Our activity and metabolism slow down to match the available heat. There is no danger." "There is always danger, rugged handsomeness. I admit it. I am afraid." Times will be better. Take my hand." One with rugged handsomeness extended a short, scaly arm and took the other's hand. Together they slipped through the oozing mud, seeking out a warmer place. "I don't care what you say, the old man is not to be hurt." Ross was getting angry by this time, and if he had not been in his own apartment, he might have considered throwing something against the wall. "Not hurt, you understand?" said Mick, Crin's current sleepmate. "I just want to send some of the boys around to talk to him, show him the wisdom of cutting us in on the action." "I know your boys," Ross said. "He wouldn't have an intact bone in his body by the time you got through with him. We'll show him he's too old, that it's time he turned the business over to younger people, namely us. Look, I've got nothing against the old man," said Ross. "None of us do. It's just that he's in the way. He'll never agree to it, never. He actually seems to love those slimy worms." "Why don't we just steal the whole mess and sell them ourselves?" Crin asked. "Can't do that. Everyone knows the old man is the only one authorized to sell the crystals." "Sell them on the black market," she suggested. "No way. We wouldn't get enough for them. We'd have to take too much of a cut." "Even if they were the only ones available?" asked Lon, who had entered during the argument. "But they're not the only ones," said Mick. "They could be," Lon said. "What do you mean by that?" Ross asked. "If there weren't any more crystals being produced and we held the whole available supply, we could get whatever we wanted for them. By then it wouldn't matter if we were authorized or not. The demand is very high. The only problem with that is that they make them all the time. If all the worms were dead, they couldn't make any more crystals." "But they're not dead," said Ross. "They could be. Let me tell you what I found." "Come, it is time to bless the new crop," said one with rugged handsomeness. "I know. I feel it too." From the burrows they came in small groups to the edge of the field, creating soft ripples in the smooth mud. They were overseen by one who watches and waited for the signal. Those who chant went first, sliding easily through the freshly planted surface. Their song filled the air with the sadness of the project and abandonment. For a long time they alone crossed the field in a carefully determined pattern. The rest waited, feeling tied in spirit with those who chant. Soon the melody shifted and the tune became more hopeful, almost cheerful. Words were sung of the discovery and of hope for the crop as well as for change in the future. At this, all those at the sidelines paired off and started toward the middle of the field. Soon the field was a mass of writhing bodies and churning mud as they wove intricate patterns back and forth. The freshly planted embryo stage of the crystals occasionally attached themselves to the passing bodies, only to detach themselves shortly afterward, leaving small red patches on the skin. All this was accompanied, as always, by the rising voices of those who chant. It appeared that this was necessary for the development of the crystals. The origin of the activity was as obscure and full of legend as the project. It was simply done that way, that was all. Those crystals that did not attach themselves to the people never developed the music nor the particular glow. Often crystals near the edge, or those that grew wild outside the field, would be found, and they would appear dull beside their counterparts. It was said by some that they sucked at the soul of those who swim. This was often disputed and provided the main source of conversation during the freeze. "Are you sure this is the way?" Ross asked. "I've never been so far away from the city before." Do you think they'd keep something this dangerous where the likes of you could stumble over it? Lon returned, picking his way through the dark trail. True, they were several miles away from the city. They had ridden bikes most of the way until the trail became too rough and narrow. Soon they rounded a bend, and a long one-story building came into view. "That's it," said Lon. "Where do we go?" Ross asked as the two of them crept closer under the cover of darkness and the dense trees. "Around to the left. The third window on that side will be unlocked for us. The alarm is short-circuited and the bars have been loosened." "This friend of yours," said Ross, "did you have to—" "I didn't tell him anything about the crystals. He hates those worms as much as we do. He was glad to do it, just to get rid of them." The window was not very high above the ground, and they easily pushed the bars aside and climbed inside. As they lowered themselves to the floor, they found that they were in a short hallway. Lon walked straight toward one of the heavily padlocked doors and gave it a push. It opened easily. He smiled, noticing that his friend had covered his tracks by making marks around the door jamb that would indicate that the door had been forced. "The guards?" Ross whispered. "I told you not to worry," said Lon. "They've been taken care of." One wall of the room they had entered was covered from floor to ceiling with small vaults, each with a small window and built-in combination lock. Lon removed a slip of paper from a fold in his tunic and studied the vaults until he found the one he was looking for. After a couple of tries, he was able to open it. "This is it," said Lon, carefully removing a small black box. "There's enough concentrated virus in here to clean the life off the surface of any planet." Those who swim gathered in exhaustion at the edge of the field. It was growing colder, and for the first time in several hours they became aware of their lack of comfort. "Bless the crop. Praise be, that they should grow to give much happiness." One who watches turned from the fields and started back to the burrows. It was a signal, and the others would follow at a discreet distance in respect to his age and wisdom. For now was the time for the feast and the laying down of fat. They must make the final preparations for the coming freeze. But first, the feast of joy. In spite of the short hours he put in, Ross knew the interior of the old man's shop well enough to move around in the dark. He and Lon worked their way back to the transmitter. As Lon held a small light, Ross looked up the coordinates for Balzar. The wire loops gave off a faint glow in the darkness as the transmitter warmed up. Ross carefully set several dials and pushed a few switches. He opened the door and his friend put the box inside. Lon pulled a small tab off the box. 10 minutes, he said, checking his watch. "It'll go off in 10 minutes. We're agreed then that we should wait a little over 9 minutes and then send it, right?" "Right. That way they can't retransmit it someplace else, like back to here." They sat back and stared at the small box sitting in the transmitter, and the magnitude of the concentrated death within the box was matched only by their greed and their hatred for the inhabitants of Balzar. Warm. It was so good to be warm again at last. The Feast of Joy was always held in Central, the largest of the boroughs. The heat unit had been turned to maximum for the event. "The blessing was good, one with rugged handsomeness. I could tell it was good. We may prosper yet." "Yes, my little one, I too feel it was a good blessing. Already the elders are talking about what a rich harvest it will bring. There will be many happy songs. Let us eat and take warmth. Tonight the freeze seems so far away." 8 minutes, 30 seconds, said Ross, closing the door. "Serves them right, stinking mud crawlers. 9 minutes. Ready? Give it to them." Ross pushed the transmit button. The glow diminished briefly and then came back to normal. It was done. The transmitter in Burrow Central chimed softly, signaling an arrival. "What could that be?" "I will check it," one with smooth features. "It is my duty tonight. I desire to watch." "Then come." One with rugged handsomeness went to the transmitter and opened the door. Inside, the dark box sat for a brief moment. Then its walls unfolded, releasing a small cloud of gray gas which dissipated rapidly and became invisible. The two at the transmitter were the only ones to see it, and they died immediately, along with everyone else in the burrow. The virus spread through the air, eliminating the small village. Since the total population of Balzar was less than 100,000 and was concentrated in a small area, they all died very quickly. Ross and Lon lugged the crystals out of storage. The entire stock was dull gray and silent, as were all the other crystals on all the other planets. The life cycle of the singing crystals had been broken by the death of their symbiont hosts. Silence replaced the soothing, hypnotic, peaceful music. The next day, the 1,000-planet war began. You've been listening to pre-1990s speculative fiction readings with a highlight on science fiction by Darrell T. Smith II. Please consider clicking the donation link in the description box. Thank you so much for your time and your imagination.